Alright, so, I haven't sorted this all out, so let's just throw it all up there. Now, first of all, I will preface. I've been reading a lot of Philip K. Dick, because I got a book of old sci-fi from my wife's uncle, and there was some Philip K. Dick in there, and then I also bought a bunch on Amazon, a bunch of Philip K. Dick books. I never read him as much when I was younger, and it's interesting because, it's like reading a Philip K. Dick book is a lot like an induced hallucination. It'll bring out your spiritual and your doubt of reality and things like that. I mean, and yet it's not like it's not like a David Lynch thing where it doesn't make sense. He'll go ahead and make sense at the end, but he uses science fiction elements to play with your notion of what is real. People are crazy and dealing with insanity, but some of what they experience is indicating the real, and then with use of things like telepathy, or in this book I'm reading, Ubik, right now, I'm almost done with, it's when people die, you could put them in this cold sleep where you can communicate with their brain for a while. They call it half-life, and it's a little bit hallucinatory for them. And so, like, is this person half-life? Is this real? What's all the hallucination? And there's people that can tell the future, rewrite the past, and so what's real and what's not real becomes really it becomes a playground for talking about human, real human. I'm trying to get it to brighten up again. I guess it's not going to. And, real human psychological states, okay? Sort of magnified with the use of speculative fiction tropes or whatever. And I've always been fascinated with that kind of thing. And I think this is why I subscribe to, a lot of people with their bizarre science fiction. There's a guy, astrometry, I used to, I'm now subscribed to Theoria, and who is it? Lee, the scientist, or, various people that have come up because of this, because of Gary, but also, like, astrometry was prior to that, or this guy who has an artist theory of time and space, he calls it. And yet, I've been talking to Gary long before it became clear that Gary is going to develop one of these of his own. But what's interesting is, we know certain things, like Gary's not, like, super low IQ and can't comprehend stuff. He notices things, like he notices that Professor Lewin, it's impossible for him to have made an honest mistake. He must be lying or possibly misinterpreting. He doesn't think he's misinterpreting, he must be lying. Another element is that when I tell Gary that it's a joke that he's complaining about Theoria's disrespect for scientists like Einstein, when Gary doesn't have that respect, and he feels very insulted. Says, prove it one time. And he's, saying this every one of his videos, really, about how they can't be trusted, and how there's thousands of these people in what would have to be a cabal. And he has the intelligence to know that that's pretty unlikely. Any scientific cabal would have to be from, a habit of tunnel vision, like a forceful, not necessarily intentional, but a forceful willing of a particular wrong interpretation. Right, like people that study eugenics and force onto the situation things that aren't true. And, we have a new element in that he doesn't realize that two microwave sources would interfere with each other, that it's impossible. He says it's irrational. Of course, that's just a matter of this difference that reality has with Gary, which is that light, electromagnetic radiation, including microwaves and the invisible light, parts of the spectrum, that they are waves. And he has this weird thing, I don't know what he's thinking exactly, and this is where, like, the Philip K. Dick reference comes in. It's like, what is he talking about when he says that the problem with the microwave experiments that he saw and that Hythloday show, that somehow the use of sound is a problem. It's because you put sound on the light waves. It's like he doesn't understand that, here's how all recording works and broadcast. Just there's a general metaphor for how it works. It goes back to how records work. Basically, a record works with a very simple idea. Let's say you have a microphone that can wiggle a needle up and down, right? So you dig that needle down into some wax, and it records sounds as the wax is spinning around and the needle is going up and down. Then later on, use a different kind of needle that can't cut the wax, or really they use the wax as a form and then make the the record itself and whatnot. But you have that same shape, and it causes the needle to go up and down. And as the needle goes up and down, you reproduce the waveform that created the curvature in the wax in the first place, right? Right, so you could do that with anything. This is why the first things were just wax tubes. Now, with with broadcasts, it's the same kind of thing, so there is no sound that was put on those microwave carrier signals. The microwave carrier signals was a certain frequency, and if you put that into an electronic circuit that outputs sound, you hear a tone that relates to the saw wave in the case of the videos that we're talking about. And it's afterwards. You're getting, hearing that buzz on or off is exactly the same as the detector showing a high amount of microwaves or a low amount. So it's like he has all the elements of this, and yet, because he thinks it's impossible that microwaves are waves, he just doesn't get it. Hythloday, for his part, says some things that I think are like, because obviously it's way more lucid than what Gary's going through. He obviously understands how the sound is converted into electromagnetic radiation, which is converted back into sound. He understands that the part of the experiment we're worrying about, you can just think in terms of electromagnetic radiation, because the conversion to and from sound is on the outside of that device, on the either long ends of that device, and is separate. You could just look at the needle and see it gets zero or goes to a peak. He says other things sometimes that make me think that his relationship with Gary is that Gary feeds him, some sense that that there is something wrong commonsensically with the common way of putting the scientific interpretation of what's going on. But Hythloday's difference with the scientific, the common way of describing the scientific interpretation, his differences between what he believes and that are much more narrow, whereas Gary's are huge and gross, and thinking lasers, will bend or not bend, or, depending on how you want to talk about it. Gary gets that just grossly wrong, testably wrong. Now, this microwave thing is interesting because I haven't looked up the prices of those parts, but it looks to me like that's probably a few $100s, maybe a $500 or $600 experiment, cheaper on eBay to get the parts. So it's something you could perform, and Gary just doesn't get that. Look, the reason people think that light is waves is because of this kind of behavior. If it was a bunch of BBs, then it wouldn't have this kind of behavior. Now, there's other subtle things that make you think, well, it is happening particularly, and then that's why we have the confusing, situation we have about the so-called duality. But what he doesn't seem to get is that the duality is confusing in both directions. You have something like electrons that looks primarily like particles, but you can see subtle wave effects, in other words, the interference. Whereas with photons, it's the other way around. Light is primarily wave-like. You shine it through glass, it can go through materials. Materials can be transparent to it. It has refractive index. It's based on wavelength. It can interfere with itself. These things are what tell us that light is a wave, including microwaves. And it's a lot like a Philip K. Dick book about the kind of reverse engineering a mind will do so that things add up the way it expects. The hoops and loops it'll jump through, the parts it'll ignore to get what it wants and expects. So, it's hard to figure out. I mean, right now I just have to say I think part of it is I see this is just projecting part of my own tendencies that I've seen in myself throughout history of, I'm not that comfortable when people agree with me. It feels like maybe this is groupthink. Maybe this is like belief in Jesus or something. This is because we all agree on it. Makes it comfortable and easy to see. If I make that conclusion, people will agree with me, and then boom, I get this shared subjectivity, and I don't feel comfortable with that. I feel more comfortable if I've made up my own idea, because then I've done it based on my experiences in nature, my own images, my own film strip, and it's almost like that's what Gary's doing. Like, it doesn't really matter if his science is correct. What matters is that it fits his common sense, as well or as poorly as it does, as well as it can. And that's not the only requirement. It also has to be different from everybody else's perspective, which leads to the emotional trap that Gary seems to be in, which is that after constructing a system that nobody can agree with because that's what it's designed to be, but he nevertheless at that point expects people, or wants them to, maybe he doesn't expect but he wants them to, or there's some cognitive dissonance about whether he expects or wants, or what the right word would be, to agree with him. So it's like an idea designed to be unique, because like me, that makes you feel more like this idea really is mine. I'm not pretending to have an idea that I heard about. This must be my idea because nobody certainly is giving me this idea. I'm giving this idea. And yet, after having done this creation of a unique thing that cannot be shared, he's mad that people don't share it. So, anyway, very fascinating, I think, still. Cheers.